It's a warm night off the coast of Italy in the middle of the Venetian lagoon. The only sound you can hear are the small laps of water hitting your little boat. Surrounded by darkness, you finally see a shape of a little island starting to take form. It's covered in trees, tall, crumbling buildings, and a big bell tower hovering above everything else. A place that looks like no one has touched it for hundreds of years. Fishermen will tell you they won't even cast their nets near this place because beneath the water and mixed with the soil are the ashes of thousands of people. This place is called Poveglia Island, and depending on who you ask, this is one of the most haunted places in the world, or one of the most misunderstood. This place has been used as a quarantine station during the Black Death, a plague hospital, even a mental asylum, and eventually left abandoned and restricted to anyone who may want to set foot on the island. But somewhere between real history and stories, the lines became blurred, and the island has become something far darker than before. Tales of plague pits, doctors performing experiments, and a bell tower where something terrible happened. Today, we'll be diving into the real story behind Poveglia Island and deciphering what really happened and why this place has become one of the most infamous urban legends in the world. Welcome to A Little Bit Cursed. This is a spooky podcast where we talk about all things true crime to urban legends. If it's a bit unsettling, you'll find it here. Today, we're talking about a little island with a lot of lore, a place in the middle of the Venetian lagoon known as Poveglia Island. So turn off the lights, light a candle, and get comfortable as we explore this historic ghost island. First of all, what is Poveglia Island? Let me explain it to you. It's made up of 3 mini islands, 2 being separated by a small body of water, and the third shaped like an octagon in front of the other 2. The earliest known account says that it appears in 421 CE, although the date is uncertain. Based on the year, it's believed that it is tied to people fleeing invasions on the mainland. This date is the most repeated, but it seems to be more of a traditional first mention, like I'm doing here. The more documented first mention is in the early 500s, where on Venice's tourism history page, it explains that refugees were escaping barbarian invasions and ended up settling on the island. Over time, a small community grew, and by the 9th century, they had trade connections and became sustainable enough to have their own local administration. The region did, however, start to face pressure during the Frankish siege of Malamaco, and despite the nearby conflict, the island was able to remain largely left alone, and they continued to take care of fishing and salting. They actually started to kind of thrive. The population was growing, and the economy was booming. This wouldn't last for too long, though, because only a couple centuries later, the War of Chioggia would be a turning point for this little island. I apologize if I am pronouncing anything incorrectly. A lot of the research in this is in Italian, and I tried to look up how to pronounce a lot of things, but I missed a couple things. So, the War of Chioggia was a conflict between Venice and Genoa, basically fighting for naval and trade power. And unfortunately for the people of Poveglia, one of the most dangerous phases happened right in the Venetian lagoon, dangerously close to the Poveglia Island people. People fled because of the vulnerable position within the lagoon, and eventually it became so dangerous, Venice actually decided to evacuate the residents because it was no longer safe. And the island was devastated because of this. After this happened, the island never really fully recovered, and this is where the journey toward abandonment and legend really begins. Through the next couple of centuries, Poveglia was largely abandoned, though it was still brought up to possibly be used in some way. That means it was still considered useful by Venice. In fact, because of this, by 1645, they built octagonal forts in the lagoon to protect key access points on the island. And that's how Poveglia's octagon became part of the defense network. Fast forward to 1776, the island came under the Magistrato alla Sanità. This is Venice's public health authority. Once this happened, it became a checkpoint for ships, cargo, and travelers coming in and out of Venice. This is really where the legend starts to form. Poveglia was chosen as a new quarantine station because of its location, and in 1793, an outbreak scare linked to arriving ships pushed for the island to become an emergency quarantine station. This is where the association between disease and death officially links to the island of Poveglia. For several years, the island was continuously used for quarantine. The fear of yellow fever and other imported diseases posed a major threat for Venice. And I'm sure with what happened with the Black Death, that probably did not help them feel better. Officially moving on to the 20th century, in 1922, existing buildings on the island were converted for medical use. Legends claim this was a mental asylum, but Venice's history page says it was for sick elderly patients. What's interesting, though, is the island was used for other things. What's interesting is the island was used for a few things. It was a hospital that took care of both geriatric and long-term care patients. But with unsafe conditions, buildings falling apart, and overgrown vegetation, by 1968, the facility closed and Poveglia became and remains abandoned. I also want to mention that people do say that it was a mental asylum, but there is no confirmed fact that it was. With all the history being considered, so far this island doesn't seem super weird, but let's dive into some of the stories that have come from this haunted place. First is something fully cemented in truth. Venice has a very well documented history of using the lagoon islands as quarantine islands for plague victims, and also those with suspected cases. Archaeology on a nearby island uncovered more than 1,500 plague victims, confirming the system Venice used. And back then, if you had the Black Death on a quarantine island, you can almost guarantee death every time. I have a very brief trigger warning. This has mentions of suicide coming up next. There's also a legend about what happened when the island became a medical institution. A doctor became obsessed with the island's ghosts and began experimenting on his patients. This doctor would come to be known as the sadistic doctor. Legend says he went mad and threw himself off the bell tower. Other sources say he didn't kill himself at all, but that a strange mist or fog did. Stories like this have only grown in the modern day. Paranormal researchers and media have exploded these stories, and this only makes Poveglia look even more sinister over time. But these theories are cemented in a mixture between fact and fiction. It's true that Poveglia has a grim history around quarantine and medical isolation, but the stories that come from it appear out of the confusion of what really happened on the island. Labeling it as a mental asylum without truly knowing if it was only amplified the mystery. over the past decade or so, the island has actually continued to be the topic of possible redevelopment, believe it or not. But many of the deals that have been made have fallen through. And by 2018, the state forbade access to the island for 6 years for safety reasons. But that hasn't stopped people from trying. In recent years, there's been even more talk about reconstructing the island to be a public lagoon park. So as of 2026, Poveglia isn't quite as abandoned as paranormal content would have you believe. And that brings us to today. What do you think about this island? Do you think they'll turn it into a public park? Do you think that's a bad idea? Or do you think the redevelopment continues to get delayed because of something that won't let it happen? Maybe we'll find out soon. But that doesn't change the lore that plagues this island. And whether they redevelop it or not, Poveglia will always have a dark mark on its history. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. If you like what you heard, you can follow A Little Bit Cursed wherever you get your podcasts. My socials are also at A Little Bit Cursed if you'd like to follow me there as well. Until next time, stay safe and try not to get caught by the sadistic doctor.